Now, last week, CBS Sports reported that, and we talked about it, that there was discussions between the SEC and the Big Ten about revenue sharing deal with the players. And we thought, man, that's progress, right? We haven't heard of major conferences. I think the Big Ten was talking about it, a little bit vaguely with in terms of paying their players and their stance on it, but there were no active discussions about coming up with a plan. And these discussions between the SEC and the Big Ten were about coming up with an actual plan to have revenue sharing with the players. And they said that the 4 power conferences actually had become involved at the later end, but it started with the SEC and it started with the Big Ten. And they called it the modern model, I believe is what they called it, something along those lines. So Ross Dellinger, though, he reported over the weekend that, and he says, and as an industry executives continue to negotiate with lawyers, and we talked about the antitrust lawsuits against the NCAA, and sometimes these damages can be tripled, which, now you're talking about damages in the billions of dollars potentially if they lose these cases. And we know the courts don't like the NCAA. They believe like I've always believed, that they're kind of a borderline criminal syndicate, and they're violating antitrust laws and have been for decades. And now that the free market has hit major college sports because of the NIL, they've been exposed even more. The transfer portal and player empowerment have exposed their corruption even more. But anyway, I digress. Getting back to this story. So he said these are details that were shared with him, basically with anonymous sources, all right, out of anonymity. And he said there are negotiations that are active and have been for as many as 8 months. He said not a new revelation, but he said the concepts of this new proposal that's being formalized, he said, actually are a bit surprising. So he's claiming that first of all, they got to settle these lawsuits. This is part of these antitrust lawsuits. That's what's really starting to hasten this movement. Is, hey man, these antitrust lawsuits are going to collapse the NCAA. Like basically, the NCAA won't survive it. All these antitrust, if they lose them, which everybody anticipates they will. So the 10-year settlement agreement could cost each power school as much as $300 million over the decade, or $30 million a year. That figure assumes a school meets what is believed to be, one, a $17 to $22 million revenue distribution cap for athletes. A salary cap.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen. that's they call it what they want. Distribution cap. It's a salary cap. 2, at least $2 million in withheld NCAA distribution for back damages. That's paying essentially, I guess, lawsuits for former players.
Yeah.
Right? And that have sued them. And 3, as much as $10 million in additional scholarship costs related to an expansion of sports-specific roster sizes, a concept previously unpublicized. The $30 million price tag, the starting figure for an industry that has only provided athletes with mostly non-cash resources, is about 20% of the average athletic department budget of public schools in the ACC, Big Ten, SEC, and Big 12. However, as reported earlier, the revenue sharing portion of the new model is permissive, meaning schools are not required to reach the cap or share revenue at all. Schools will have basically discretion to expand scholarships or not across new roster limits expected to be implemented across all sanctioned sports. So basically what Ross Dellinger is saying here is basically, I don't know if everybody can afford this model. And he says there's a deadline basically within the next 40 days to basically agree or disagree on this thing. Implementation no sooner than fall of 2025 is what Ross Dellinger says here in his Yahoo Sports reports. Fall of 2025 if they agree to this. They got 40 days. So Patrick, it's happening. I think we were discussing it last week as if, okay, at least they're discussing what the future will be.
This is something
the
that's
future is now.
Yeah, you were like, I think both of us were probably in the time frame of like, okay, in about 5 years is when we'll kind of start to see the revenue sharing take hold, about 5+ years. And yeah, and 2 is not what I was expecting at all. I do think this is business, as how business normally works now, which is the numbers may be a little bit high. I don't think they're that high, but they're maybe a little bit high in trying to add in extra pieces as these negotiations are going on to make sure that the public sentiment is against it.
Yeah.
That they, all these schools know that they need to make sure that's why it's phrased as 300 million as opposed to 30 million a year, because 30 million a year doesn't sound as bad as 300 million. It's
over 10 years. He's like, yeah, it is. That's 300 million.
Yeah. and this is so, but it's those kind of concepts. I think this is partly, the conferences leaking out things that they want to be told of. You understand this could cripple the sport and it's going to kill it because these guys want this money. And so you say it could cause a lot of problems, and there is. But if you say, well, the business is going to cripple it, then don't propose something that will cripple it. You have to find something in the middle of it. But yeah, it's basically they're up against the rock and the hard place because they didn't want to give at all. So you have to make steps towards it. They seem like they're questioning putting together a gigantic leap, which is trying to make it real. I'm not a huge fan of the salary cap. I'm somebody that believes that you shouldn't be able to pay players. I'm fine with the NIL being how it's done of that, but I think if the colleges are revenue sharing, then you just revenue share. You don't get to say, well, our quarterback makes 10 million and our offensive lineman makes 1, and we're going to offer you more because we have this salary cap room. I'd prefer it to be even out a little bit more. It just seems like that's kind of more in the sense of what college sports always been. I get we're in a changing landscape, but it feels like it's, now that it is the Big 12, the Big 10, and the SEC basically spearheading it, they don't really care about any of the small schools. They are going full force of this is just going on the big ones. And they've gone from the flip of what the NCAA was we don't care about the big schools. We're going to listen to the mass voices and
do what's right for the greater good.
For the greater good. We're going to do what's right for, we have 50 people complaining to us about 3 schools. We'll listen to the 50 and not the 3. And now it is flipping on its head, which is we will care about the 3 and the 50 will have to figure it out.
The reason they're accelerating this is because of another antitrust lawsuit. Yeah. Guys, the antitrust lawsuits are just killing them right now. The NCAA is already responsible for paying about $2.9 billion in back damages over a 10-year period.
Yeah.
And there are more, and they haven't even started the House versus NCAA starts in January 2025. They got another antitrust lawsuit that they got to settle now, Fontenot versus the NCAA. It's a 4th antitrust case, different lawyers than the other ones too. So this is something separate altogether. Guys, the NCAA can't keep up. It's going to capsize on itself.
Yeah.
And that's why they're accelerating, trying to get this settlement and this deal done to go, okay, we just got to make sure that we get a settlement done, because no way the NCAA can pay what could end up being $4 billion in damages. There's no way. So that's why they have accelerated this pace. And if you go look at it right now, they said, however, they have accelerated recently as plaintiff lawyers handed the NCAA Power Leagues a deadline of 40 days. So it is the plaintiff's lawyers, it's the lawyers basically are saying, listen, we'll settle with you, but you got about 40 days.
Yeah, y'all got to figure this out. Yeah,
we're going to court, and we're going to win in the court.
Yeah.
Because y'all have been violating antitrust laws in this country for, I don't know, 50, 60 years at the least. So we're going to win. And the highest court in the land has said, okay, we're not siding with the NCAA. Bring us more cases and we will help you crush it. The only question is what arises out of the ashes of what used to be the NCAA. If you're going to have this new model, what's going to be the governing authority? How you going to, that's got to be something too. Or are you going to still allow the NCAA to be it? I think this is part of them separating the have and have nots, and also separating from the NCAA too. This will be it. And the NCAA can still have their place, but not with major college sports. Like I told you guys, we're going to be in the Android, iPhone era, because basically most of these schools probably can't even afford this. And it's not even this is not even an option for them. They can't afford it.
Yeah.
The schools that can't afford it will be in a different league altogether. And like Patrick said, even if there is a salary cap and teams can, they have the option. They don't have to necessarily meet certain, salary cap conditions. There are other teams that will be able to, basically max it out every damn year, and that'll and further separate the have and the have-nots. This is the beginning of it. Android, iPhone era of college sports. You got two choices. You're gonna have Big Ten, and you're gonna have the SEC. Everything else is gonna be considered a different brand of college sports altogether. And where do you think the best athletes are gonna go? Where do you think the best athletes are gonna go? You think it's gonna be even close in recruiting? All the best athletes are gonna go to the best brand of college sports. And all the athletes that perform at the other group of five level, whatever it is, they're not going to stay there. They're all leaving to go to the Power Five where they can pay more money and you got a bigger platform. Guys, this is it. The separation of the have and the have-nots. They agree to this. They've basically agreed. They've already done it in the college football playoff revenue sharing model. We have already seen that in terms of how they treated the group of five and even the Big 12 and the rest of them. But this will further, I think, clarify the future landscape of college sports will be, I think one where players will get revenue sharing. There's no doubt about that. But also we're moving closer basically to direct athlete compensation. Essentially, that's basically what it's going to be. Amateurism as we know it in that realm will be dead. It's truly dead.
Yeah, no, it's said that way. And unfortunately, that was the issue of the money just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And, you can't, it's very hard to take all this revenue and everything else and just say, well, the way back when no one was making money, it was okay for us to do it. So now that we're all making, we're all billionaires, you guys are still stuck in the era where we weren't making any money because the system was set up in a way where we weren't getting super rich doing it. Now we're getting super rich and you guys get no piece of it. You have to make changes. But yeah, this is what happens when you lose all your negotiation rights because you refuse to progress over time on a reasonable scale. You are now so far behind that they're trying to make up for, which said 50 years of progress you're trying to make up for now. And it's going to kill the NCAA because they just continue to get pushed back on, and no one has any ounce of sympathy for the NCAA. It's crazy that the sentiment in the public for so long has been amateurism is amateurism. You shouldn't, the scholarship should be enough. And people will still have that, but then in the same voice be like, oh, also the NCAA is terrible. You're not a more sympathetic figure. We may not like this, but you guys also are bad.
They're terrible. Yeah. I mean, like I said, they don't really have any advocates. Nobody advocates for the NCAA. I don't think they really have any alliances.
No.
It seems like Congress and the Capitol Hill seems to be against them. The courts are against them. Fans don't like them. Commissioners and conference commissioners and athletic directors, they don't trust them. So I think everybody's pretty much ready for a new governing authority over at least major college sports because the NCAA has failed. And I will say this, the NCAA's new president, he's actually pretty good. Charlie Baker, some of the stuff that he has proposed, some of the stuff he's already pushed through, like the transfer portal update where now you can transfer without limitations. You can transfer as much as you want to. Some people say that's ridiculous, but you have to meet certain academic requirements to do so. And that was always the idea I had. I say you have to just make it where you have to have a 2.8 or a 3.0 GPA to transfer. You can transfer as much as you can. I guarantee you most of the guys wouldn't do it. And if they really wanted that kind of flexibility and they really wanted that freedom, they would apply themselves more as a student athlete and you would incentivize academics, which the NCAA could care less about. That's a great idea by Charlie Baker. I love that idea. He's actually really progressive. He just became the president, I don't know, 10 years too late.
Yeah.
If he'd have been a president 10 years ago, I guarantee
someone forward thinking. But that's what we can say about the Big 12. If Brett Yormark had become the commissioner of the Big 12 5 years earlier, does Texas and Oklahoma leave? And does that put the SEC in the power position that they're in and all? Yeah. And so you have that. If the Pac-12 doesn't have Kliavkoff, do they,
leadership.
Yeah, that leadership across college football has, there's too many people that had commissioners that were really good for the smaller sports. It would have been fine if you took football and basketball out of the equation. If baseball was the biggest sport they had, I think they would have been okay.
Yeah, you're right about that. Honestly, that's true. And the NCAA will never relinquish basketball because that's their big moneymaker.
Yeah. And I mean, eventually, if they don't handle it, there won't be an NCAA, so they're going to have to, because the courts will order them to sell off whatever they have and give up their rights to, basically because to pay off those settlements. So that's what I think they're trying to realize is that there's a future with no NCAA because the people with money want to take away what they have. And so if you fund ways to get them basically financially ruined, then you can go in and get a bargain on the NCAA tournament.
It's unbelievable. Yeah, I have no idea where it's going, but I'll admit it's happening faster than I thought. Happening faster than anybody thought.
Oh yeah.
So
when
we'll
you hear
see.
40 days, when we thought,
what?
We think of 40 days and go, man, it's been 40 years we haven't cared about this. We talk about 40 days now.
Yeah, and that forced timeline, if you will, or deadline is the lawyers who are this is this new antitrust case, the Fontenot versus NCAA. They are worried about the House. They're trying to settle the House versus the NCAA case.
Yeah.
Which could end up being, billions of dollars in damages. They're trying to settle. Then they got another antitrust lawsuit that is now going to keep them from settling the House lawsuit. So, and now they're thinking, and this other, I think, group has said, hey man, we'll settle, but you got about 40 days. And otherwise we're going to court. And that's why they're trying to stay out of court. Everybody, they would like to stay out of court and they like to settle all this stuff out of court because the NCAA is going to lose in court.
Yeah.
All the time. And the lawyers know they're going to lose in court. So that's the leverage they have. And that's why these very radical changes are being pushed through very quickly now, an accelerated rate, because they're saying, all right, we could settle. Anything is cheaper than having to pay billions of dollars, which the NCAA does not have. And then ultimately, what happens to the NCAA? And I don't think they're worried about, making sure the NCAA is, that it's stable, and make sure the NCAA is something that is, now going to be the governing authority. I don't think they're worried about empowering the NCAA in that respect. I think they're just worried about they don't have a plan, like a succession plan for what happens after the NCAA. And what if this ends up being the end of it and there's nothing in place to be the governing authority of major college sports? Nobody wants that.
Yeah.
So figure out the plan. That's why they want to figure out the plan first going forward, settle all this, and then whatever happens to the NCAA happens. But that plan may just be the Big Ten and the SEC deciding, you know what, we got the money to do it. We're doing it. We can't worry about everybody else. Can't drag everybody else. That's the NCAA's job. That was never our job. That was never our responsibility to worry about all of college sports. We're just worried about us. And I think that's why you're starting to see these alliances. And it is, like I said, it's happening quickly, very fast. All right, well, we'll come back. We'll get into Raj rant on the other side. Didn't get to it, but I want to get into the pockets, the most fertile pockets of talent in terms of metro areas in the country.